1350, Europe's cities reeked of death, bodies piled in streets from London to Constantinople. The Black Death had slaughtered half the continent's population in 3 years, more devastating than any war, famine, or invasion in recorded history. Castles stood half empty, fields lay fallow, kings ruled over ghost kingdoms. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles south, Mansa Musa's Mali Empire controlled half the world's gold supply and commanded an army of 100,000 men. The timing had never been so perfect. Europe, for the first time in centuries, lay completely defenseless. Mali possessed wealth that made European monarchs look like peasants. When Musa journeyed to Mecca in 1324, he spent so much gold in Cairo that he crashed the Egyptian economy for a decade. His empire stretched across territories larger than Western Europe, connected by trade routes that moved salt, gold, and knowledge from the Atlantic to the Sahara. Timbuktu attracted scholars from 3 continents. Songhai commanded the only naval fleet in West Africa, massive Khanta vessels capable of carrying 80 tons of cargo. Just before Musa took power, his predecessor had sent 2,000 ships into the Atlantic seeking what lay beyond the horizon. They never returned, but the ambition was real. The capability existed. Yet between African power and European vulnerability stood invisible barriers, more formidable than any ocean. Geography conspired against conquest. The Canary Current flows one direction west toward the Americas, not north toward Europe. River-trained vessels struggled in open ocean. The Mediterranean remained controlled by established naval powers who'd been building sea-going warships for centuries. African empires had mastered desert crossings and river navigation, but deep-water maritime expansion required different technologies, different knowledge. Disease worked both ways. Malaria had protected sub-Saharan Africa from northern invaders for millennia. Europeans who ventured inland died within weeks, but that same protective barrier became a constraint. African armies moving north would leave their disease advantage behind, entering territory where they held no immunity edge. The strategic calculation reversed. More fundamentally, Mali's wealth came from controlling trade, not conquering territory. Gold flowed from mines they didn't directly occupy. Salt moved along routes they managed through diplomacy and taxation. The entire economic model depended on stability, on keeping caravans moving, on maintaining the peace that made merchants rich. Invasion meant disrupting the very networks that generated power. European feudalism thrived on territorial expansion and subjugation. African prosperity came from something entirely different. When the Portuguese finally developed ocean-going ships in the 1400s, they didn't defeat African armies. They bypassed African trade routes entirely. New Atlantic coastal commerce slowly drained wealth from inland empires. By 1591, when Morocco invaded Songhai with firearms, the technological window had closed. Gunpowder weapons, which had been equalizing forces across Eurasia for 2 centuries, finally reached West Africa through conquest, not trade. Ethiopia proved the principle 4 centuries later at Adwa in 1896. 100,000 Ethiopian soldiers with modern French and Russian rifles crushed an Italian invasion force. Unity, preparation, and equivalent technology delivered victory. But this required very specific conditions: centralized command, diplomatic weapon purchases, a single external threat to unite against. Mali in 1350 would have faced dozens of fractured European kingdoms, each with distinct military traditions, in terrain their armies had never seen. Supported by supply lines stretching across seas they'd barely explored. History turns on capacity meeting opportunity at the exact moment when circumstances align. That moment never came. The wealth was real. The military strength was real. The European vulnerability was catastrophic and prolonged. But oceanic technology strategic incentives, and geographic realities never converged to make African colonization of Europe anything more than a theoretical possibility, one that reveals as much about what did happen as about what never could.